Hey guys, it's Mr. Schmidt here, and in this video we're going to talk about shifting or moving the demand curve. So the first thing I want to do here is explain to you the difference between doing this, so quantity, price, demand, and just like with a PPC, this is what a demand curve shift would look like to the right. Remember, right is more, left is less, so this would be a right shift of the demand curve. And then let's talk about what I showed you in the law of demand video, which is a movement along the curve. So like from point A to point B. So like what's the difference between these two graphs, right? Well, besides what I just said, a shift of the demand curve versus movement along it, it's probably better to talk about what would cause these two things to happen. This would be a decrease in the price of a good. Okay? Remember, the only thing that can move you along a demand curve is changing the price of the good. And this is something students throughout the history of econ tend to forget, right? They want to shift the demand curve here. Don't do that. If the price of the good is what's changing, then you need to move along the demand curve, okay? What I want to focus on this video is what would cause a demand curve to shift, either move to the right or, we'll call this D2, move to the left. What would cause that to happen? And there's actually a few different things here. We're going to talk about most of them in this video, and then we'll talk about a couple of them in the next video, okay? Before we move on, I want to just reiterate, what do I mean by shifting the demand curve? What does it actually mean? What it means, if we do a right shift, this means we are now willing / able to buy more at all prices. Okay, so no matter what the price is, we are now willing and able to buy more than we were before at all prices. A left shift would mean just the opposite. We're willing and able to buy less at all prices. So just to understand what we mean by a shift of the demand curve. Now that's different than moving along the demand curve, which means all we're doing is changing a specific spot we are along the demand curve we have. We're not shifting it left or right. So let's talk about what actually moves or shifts the demand curve. So what I'm going to do here is at the top of the page, I'm going to put what we call the shifter, and then what has to happen to it to move the demand curve to the left, which is less demand, which is we're buying less than before at all prices, or moving it to the right, we're buying more at all prices, and it's a shift to the right. So the first one is buyers. Okay, so if we are going to shift, let's do it like that here, left and right. So what has to happen to buyers, the number of buyers, we could say, in the market to move the demand curve to the left? Well, that would be less buyers, right? If there's less buyers of the good, there's going to be less demand for that good. And if there are more buyers, you're going to move the demand curve to the right. Right is more, left is less. If there's more buyers in the market, it follows that there are now more demand for that good. So less buyers, we move the demand curve to the left. More buyers, we move the demand curve to the right. So I'm going to go ahead and just erase the part I don't need anymore here. Feel free to rewind if needed. And let's go ahead and do the next shifter. The next one is tastes, which is a fancy way of saying what do people like? Their likes, right? Their preferences. What do they like? If people like the good less, then we're going to move the demand curve to the left, right? People don't like it, they're not going to demand it. They're not going to want to buy it. They're not going to be, they may be able to buy it, but they're not going to be willing to buy it. So they like the good less. If they like the good more, like, oh my gosh, I can't live without this good. Where has it been all my life? Please take all my money. That would shift the demand curve to the right. More demand. They like it more, you move it to the right. They like it less, you move the demand curve to the left. Left is less, right is more. Okay, so that's taste. Okay, then we'll erase again. We're going to do actually just one more for this video, and then we're going to call it a video. So this next one's a little weird because there's two different scenarios with it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say income for a normal good. So income for a normal good. And by normal good, we just mean most goods, right? Most goods are what we call normal goods. So income is how much money a person has. So this works just like you would think it would. If people have less income, then demand is going to shift to the left, right? If people have less income, they can't buy as much as before. We already talked about this with the income effect. Demand shifts to the left. If people have more income, more money in their pockets, then demand shifts to the right. They can buy more than they could before at all prices. Now that's with normal goods. And again, assume that if a question doesn't tell you, assume that the good is a normal good. However, there is a special case that you need to be aware of. So let's go ahead and talk about it really quickly. Just go ahead and erase all that here. So income for if it's an inferior good. So what's an inferior good? A good example of this would be like ramen noodles. So those of you going off to college, one thing you will notice is how many college students eat ramen noodles. Now, why do they do this? Well, college students tend to be poor and ramen noodles tend to be cheap. So college students have less income, but they demand more ramen. You see how this is different, right? So actually less income shifts the demand of an inferior good to the right. College students have less income. They want to buy more ramen because it's cheap, it's affordable, right? Now, when college students leave college, they get, awesome jobs that hopefully pay really well. They have better tastes, right? They can afford nicer things. And so their demand for ramen is going to shift to the left, which means less demand. So in this case, left is more and right is less. So it's opposite. So you got to be very, very careful with income with shifting a demand curve. If it's an inferior good, left, more income, right, less income. If it's a normal good, it's the opposite. Okay, so you just got to be careful with that one. It's not too bad. You just got to follow the wording carefully. Again, the question will tell you if it is an inferior good. And before we end here, just want to show you one more time what those shifts look like. If demand goes to the left, we have D and then D1. It really doesn't matter what you call the two demand curves so long as it's a D and they're not called the same thing. And then a right shift. The only thing I'll say here is just make sure your arrows are pointing directly to the right or directly to the left. Don't angle them up or down because that's going to confuse you. The worst thing to do would be to do a down arrow or an up arrow. Do not do those. Do not do up and down. That will get you into trouble. Trust me. That's all for this video on shifting the demand curve, part 1. Until next time, have a great day.